Welcome to Math 65. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use the graphing calculator to graph systems of equations and find point of intersection. So here's a word problem that we've been working on in class and that you'll definitely see come up. So you have two construction companies. One charges a flat rate of $5,000 plus $15 per square foot. The other company charges a flat rate of $7,000 plus $12.50 per square foot. So I'm using function notation here, a of x and b of x, but essentially that means the same thing as y. Okay, so what we're going to want to do for this equation to graph it, let's get out our calculator and we'll press y equals. And when we get to the y equals menu, we'll want to clear out any equations that we have graphed. Now what's nice about I have the color screen version, so each different equation that I have, when I use that y equals button, I can graph multiple equations and they'll graph in different colors. So I'm just going to grab two lines here. We'll start with the first equation, 5,000 plus 15x, and the next one, 7,000 plus 1250x. And then we're going to want to press graph. Now, most graphing calculators are usually set up by default in the standard viewing window. In fact, if you press zoom, standard, I'll show you, mine's thinking about the graph for a minute. You notice how I don't see the lines here, and it's like, well, that's not very helpful. So if I press zoom, standard, that gives me that 10 up, 10 over, negative 10, negative 10. So that's going to be our standard viewing window. If I want to change the window, I use the window button. And so here I've kind of drawn out this little graph that we have been using to graph this. I mean, I didn't graph the actual equations, but just in terms of what window we need to see, our minimum x and y are going to be here. That's 0, 0. And our maximum x, we decided when we graphed, was 1,000, and our maximum y was 20,000. So you kind of have to play around with graphing it, you know, and you might play around with the window to find the right settings, but x minimum we'll say is 0. X maximum is 1,000, and you don't really need to change the scale. It turns out we were using a scale of 200, so if you want to do that you can, but it's not going to change the window at all. What's going to change the window are these minimum and maximum. So the y minimum is 0 and the y maximum is 20,000. So now we're going to press graph, and you can see that that window has now changed and I'm able to see the graph. There's the 5,000 y-intercept, and this is increasing at a little bit faster rate than the other one, which has 7,000 y-intercept and is increasing at 1250 per square foot. You have to be able to see where the graphs cross in order to do this next part. So, so far we've used y equal to plug in our equation. We've used the window to change the window setting. And now if I want to calculate the point of intersection, I'm going to use anything on your calculator that's in blue. We're going to use the second key. So we'll do second, calculate, and you see I have a lot of different things that this menu allows me to do. One of them is to find the intersect. And so we want to press 5, or you could scroll down to 5 and push enter. Now it's going to ask us 3 questions, and we're really just going to say yes, 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 enter, enter, enter. So the first question is this the first curve? It's calling the line a curve because other than linear equations, everything else we graph is pretty much a curve. So we'll press enter there. The second curve, you see how the blinker moved to the second curve, and if you only have 2 lines graphed, then that's, you know, pretty obvious that you're going to say yes and yes to those. And then guess is because you could have multiple points of intersection for different kinds of equations. Only for graphs, you're only going to have one point of intersection, so it's pretty safe to just push enter here as well. It'll jump to that point of intersection, which we already happen to know was 17,000, and you can see that right at the bottom where it says we're calculating the intersect, and it says x is 800, y is 17,000. Another way to do this is to look at the table, second table. Now I actually already set my table to jump to 800 so that you can see that they're all, 800. When x is 800, y is 17,000. And now to get to that table, I'm just using second graph, because graph, that button will graph it. Second graph will take you to the table. Now, if you didn't, before I was showing that your normal table is going to start at like 1. And so it would take you a long time to get to 800. So how I did that was I'm going to use the table setup, which is right above the window. So in order to get to that, I'm using the blue second table setup. And then I have it set to start at 800, but normally it's set to start at 1. The change in the table, you could actually get to 800 really fast if you change it to count by 100. So that triangle table, that basically means the change in the table. What do you want it to count by, right? And maybe we should actually start it at 0. So let's go back to, once I have that starting at 0, counting by 100, if I go second table, I can see that I can actually get to 800 pretty fast in counting by 100. If I want to change that again, I'm going to go second table setup. Let's start at 0 and count by 1. Second table. And you can see that I would have to scroll for a long time here if I wanted to get all the way to 800. Now let's do another equation just so we can see how we can set the calculator back to those original settings. So let's go to our y equals. I'm going to just clear out the equations I have. And you can select any lines you want. You'll get different colors if you have the color screen. So I'm just going to graph 2x plus 5 and negative 1/2 x plus 5. Now, are those two lines going to intersect? Ask yourself that. Why will they intersect? Okay, because the slopes are different. Now, notice the slope I gave you is you have a slope of 2 and then a slope of negative 1/2. That negative 1/2 is actually the opposite reciprocal. So what kind of lines are these going to be? Yes, they will be perpendicular lines. Does anybody know already before I graph them where they'll cross? Yes, they will cross at 0, 5. Why is that? Oh, because they both have the same y-intercept. So now let's press graph, and you'll see that there's a problem here. Well, this is not a very good picture of my graph. I don't even see one of the lines. And why is that? It's because this window setting. So if I could go to window and change the settings there, or if I want to do it really fast, I just press zoom and I scroll down to zoom standard. Okay, and this is actually not a square, which is the reason why you're going to see that they're supposed to be perpendicular, but they don't look perpendicular on the screen. Okay, that's because this one goes up 10, this goes over 10, but you can see that it's a rectangular screen. It's not a square screen. They are intersecting here at 0, 5, and if I want to prove that again, how would I find the point of intersection? Exactly. Second, calculate, and then which one will I choose? 5. Great. Now this is asking me, am I on the first curve? Yes, that's the first curve. Is that the second curve? Yes. Guess? You tell me, calculator. Enter. Okay, and you see here, point of intersection is 0, 5. If I really want to prove that those are perpendicular, I could use zoom square. And that is actually now the lines will look perpendicular because they've squared up the screen so that it has the same exact scale on the x and y axis. And you can see that looks like a pretty good 90-degree angle. And you can see how with the window settings, it's slightly different, the x's and the x minimum and maximum versus the y minimum and maximum. So zoom square or zoom standard, either one, it would work fine. And then remember, you can always go back to the table. So we go second table, and we want to see where they intersect. We're going to notice that when x is 0, both equations give us 5. That means that both equations have the same y-intercept of 5, and that's where the lines intersect. So hopefully that was helpful. I've gone over most of the things that are useful when graphing. Changing the window, um, changing the table setup, finding the table, finding the calculate menu, and graphing. Oh, and entering equations. And again, you don't want to have that plot turned on. So sometimes that's an issue where the plot is black and highlighted, and you'll just have to go scroll, use your little arrow button here to go up and press enter to turn that plot off, because sometimes that's an issue with graphing. I would recommend only having two equations at a time so that you make sure that you don't get confused about which equations you're graphing. So I'll shut it down there, and hopefully you found this video useful.